Well, good morning. Here we are again. This is Addy and Colin's podcast based around our recently published book, The Rivers of Money, Social and Economic History of Modern Oil Trading. And this morning, it's the 17th of November. It's cold. At least it's cold here in the UK. That shouldn't bother us because we're inside. And it certainly won't bother our guests this morning. Thomas Galdy and Nancy Galdy, who are coming to us from, I believe, sunny Sardinia. So, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Nice to have you
Good
on
morning.
the podcast.
Good morning.
And we're looking forward to having a good old chat with you about particularly the early days of the energy business and in particular oil trading. So perhaps maybe you can both introduce yourselves actually, rather than me trying to do that for you.
Thomas, you first?
No, ladies first.
Ladies first. Introduce myself in the sense of when I began in the oil business or?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I started at Sun Oil Company, Sun Trading Company in, I believe, 1978, 79. And that was really the beginning of an international career. I had the good luck to work with a wonderful, very tight, small, energized group of people, and that was my first step
At Sun.
at Sun.
And then?
And then I moved to Morgan Stanley in New York. I was headhunted by Robert Ferduniak in New York to set up their first actually oil trading division for an investment bank internationally, which was a terrifying offer to accept, I can tell you. And the first task was to build a team, and we did that. That was in 1984. I should be clear about that. It was 1984, September of 1984. And after I left Morgan Stanley, I went on to do some crisis management in the international business, based mostly in Germany. But in one case, the headquarters was in New York, so I was back to our home in New York.
You can mention the crisis management. They like names.
Well, we'll get into all that. I assume. No, that's just a brief introduction. How's that?
That's fantastic, Nancy. And Thomas, tell us.
Yeah. Yes. Well, my stepfather, the man that raised me, was in the oil business. His name was Harry Lewis. He had a company called Commerce Oil, which was originally a lubricating oil company, and then he had plans to build a refinery with Gulf Oil on the East Coast, and that didn't go. After 4 or 5 years. The permits weren't given, and so he basically started again in the oil business. And I was during my university days, I would come in the evenings, since I spoke a few languages, 2-3 times a week, and write out faxes to people, overnight faxes on the fax machine in various languages. And then I was about a few years later, after I graduated, I was teaching English in Zurich, and Commerce Oil had a little office in Zurich, and they called me and said, "Could you go here? Could you go there to pick up some of the bills of lading and some of the documentation?" And that morphed into sort of a permanent job. So I was working for Commerce Oil in Zurich in the 1973, 1974. But I was familiar with sort of the oil language from home and from working on the fax sort of in the late 60s and the 70s. And I stayed with Commerce Oil until I left the oil business about 10, 12, 14 years later, something like that. So I spent working from about 1972 to 1984, 1985, and familiar with it about 5 years before that.
Yeah, this is really interesting to me, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting to our listeners. And I tell you why, because it's a period in the marketplace where you can't go online onto the internet and read about it easily. There just is not very much there. The internet, of course, wasn't with us at that stage.
Yeah.
I suppose if you went and ran through the drafts of Petroleum Intelligence Weeklies or Petroleum Arguses and spent a huge amount of time doing that, you'd find out some stuff, but you wouldn't find the sense of who the people were and who the companies were.
Yeah.
You guys were there. You can
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that. So back there in the early part of the 70s.
Can I ask the first question, Colin? I'm dying because I used to work, Nancy, I used to work for Sun Oil as well.
No.
I run their London office in the mid-90s.
You're
And
kidding.
yeah, and I reported Jay Serena, who must have been there when
Hey,
you were there.
Serena,
Yeah, it was
what a
my boss.
lovely man. Oh,
Absolutely.
I just recently, he's no longer with
Yeah,
us.
he's passed away, I think,
That
only
made
a
me so sad. I loved, what a lovely man. How did
wonderful,
that
wonderful
happen?
man. Yes.
Gosh, Avi.
So I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
I'm dying to find out what Sun Oil, I mean, it was even probably then at your time, it was probably one of the biggest sweet complex refinery, the three refineries, right?
Yes, yes.
And it was, when I was there in the mid-90s, it was the world's biggest sweet refining complex in the world.
It's a very, very interesting company. It was a very, very diverse. I mean, I had the really great luck when they formed the trading group. I was really hired as a PA, I guess you would call it, to Lou Nassif, who was the then head of the crude trading division. And they started the Sun Company. They started the trading division to enhance what the refining people were doing, et cetera, et cetera. And we were really blessed with touching every part of business that Sun did. We were involved in marketing the exploration oils from Venezuela, Dubai, of course, Iran. We saw everything. We knew what the refineries ran. We knew why they needed it. We knew what their product production was. We were just so blessed to see we had an overall view of the entire organization, and it was a very tightly, very neatly run corporation. And Jay was head of, at that time, well, even before, I guess, Jay was head of crude acquisitions, for the entire refining system.
And you were quite innovative, if I remember rightly, weren't you?
Very,
Right
extremely,
in the
extremely.
yeah,
Yes.
Bonnie Brash River Quaibo was something that you guys.
Yeah, no, it was very, very innovative and the trading company was really formed to enhance all of that. And they hired some very interesting characters, Vince Verdiani, Jerry Sergio, Dominic Di Piero. And the group was just high energy, creative. They never said you can't do something. There was always a way to make something work.
Paul Macht and Don Jones. Yeah. Paul Macht and Don Jones were the bosses
of the crude division at that point. Yeah. And we worked closely with the exploration company because we were the ones that marketed their oil. So we saw the whole international. We saw it from a trading point of view. We saw it from an acquisition point of view and a marketing point of view.
But the upstream that you mentioned, at least when I was there, they were actually present in the North Sea as well. So
yes.
I remember selling Brent, 15-day Brent on behalf of the upstream.
Yes.
Big players in Nigeria as well.
Well, Nigeria and Libya. Nigeria was really they love Bonnie Light. They like Brass River, but Bonnie Light was their mecca really. And and Libya, because Marcus Hook was really, I believe, really constructed to handle high wax crudes. So you had Buadafel, Cedar, Sarir, all those crudes. And I think Sun, in the late 70s, early 80s, I don't know for how long, maybe into the 90s, was the largest off-taker of Libyan Breganov. Big contract with Breganov. Yeah.
And also, since we are there at Libyan, talking about Libyan crudes, we've mentioned in our book, Colin and I, that it was Jay Serena is credited with coming up with pricing option, Nigerian pricing option. I don't know if you.
No, I don't. What period was that, Adi? I don't know.
This was somewhere in the late 80s that he asked Nigerians that because a lot of Nigerians traditionally went to the Med and Europe, because of United States being a little bit further, he wanted to see whether we can have pricing, deferred pricing.
Okay.
option. Because
That's
we were trying to get to the root of who came up with pricing options on Nigerian crude, because currently there are like at least 3 different pricings, and the roots, he was mentioned to me by Pete Bosworth, who
No,
was
I don't. That was if that was the late '80s. I was at Morgan Stanley.
right.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Talking about the Libyan though, that takes us back a little bit, doesn't it? Because it was changes in Libya that kind of kicked off the whole sort of move towards freer open markets and the availability of oil, and the Italian islands refining and the Rotterdam spot market, and et cetera, et cetera. And Thomas, you were probably there for all of that. You must
Well, there
remember.
was the Libya was one of the few producing countries that wasn't dominated by the majors. So you had this group called the Oasis Group, which was Marathon and Hess, I believe, Sun. I can't, my memory is not 100% and all of this, but you had of course, you had Occidental, who did their own deal, but you had Occidental, Marathon, Conoco, Continental Oil.
Yeah.
And so, they had this oil that they didn't really need for the United States. They weren't bringing to the United States, so they either participated in refineries or built refineries in the Mediterranean. And then there was this excess oil where you had these processing refineries that were built, such as Saras, that was built really only for third-party processing. But Conoco had a refinery. They all had offices in either Rome or Milano, less in Spain, and of course less in France, because that was really dominated by
who built Augusta in Sicily?
Augusta.
What was that for?
There was Priolo. I think Priolo was built as a processing refinery. I can't remember.
Was that Libyan crudes?
It was built for Mediterranean, Algerian, Libyan. There was Tunisian. There was also some Syrian, oil that came out of that. Regarding just occurred to me before your comment that there's nothing available sort of online of the late 60s, early 70s. As an investigator, the one information I think you can still access are, of course, the chartering. I'm sure Clarkson's in the archives and the other old shipbrokers will have all of the chartering information regarding who was chartering ships.
Yeah, and the Baltic Exchange probably as well.
Yeah, the Baltic Exchange. So they would tell you regarding who the players are, those that chartered the vessels and things like that. But
so around about this trading developed, and who were the characters? Who were the people? That started to trade this stuff and do things outside the traditional majors and their other companies.
It's kind of piecemeal. There were always the major oil companies as well as the major companies in Europe. They were never imbalanced, as you know, and whenever there was a little bit of excess, they seemed to have a front company for them. I mean, that they went to this one company and they said, we've got 5 extra cargoes of this products more than crude. I mean, crude was in the hands of the producers. And of the large companies. And they would have these companies. There was one in Geneva founded, it just occurred to me this morning, very early in the morning, a fellow by the name of Basmajiv, who was either Bulgarian, who had a company called Albaco or something very similar. And they sort of fronted for somebody. And then you had companies like Nafta Mondial. That was quite big. I can't tell you the exact dates, but in those late 60s, 70s. And of course, Mabanaft, who you mentioned in your book.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had, if Shell had some excess, I don't know if you would call it trading as in speculation. They would kind of,
exchanging.
Yeah, they would just take care of excess oil or excess demand. We need 3 cargoes of low sulfur fuel oil in New York, and they would call one. There was a company in London called Lambert and Bendall. There was a very old, distinguished company run by Harry Pratt, and then his son David took it over. And there were companies like that. You wouldn't really call them trading in the way that it became known as in total speculation. I mean, they took possession of the oil. They weren't
Broker.
back to back or anything like that. But you must understand as you do that the price of Saudi light was $1.16 a barrel, or Kuwait was 89 cents a barrel, and you bring a barrel of low sulfur fuel oil from Mediterranean to Con Edison in New York, and it would be $2.30 a barrel outturn. I mean, so the fluctuations in the market, in the pricing market, didn't really allow for a lot of what you would call now trading. But
Yeah.
there were trading companies. There were these smaller companies, that were popped up. The Tampamex was one. There was also late 60s, 70s. As I told Colin, I had my address books from the old Commerce Oil 1960 days, from Harry's days, but I threw them all away
Recently.
years ago. Not so long ago. Had I known,
And I know you were going to do this.
yeah, I don't know on eBay how much they would be worth, but I would have given them to you for your, with great pleasure.
I'm interested that you talk about all these companies, which is fascinating. But and during that period, but you haven't mentioned either Mark Rich or Ludwig Dresselson.
Oh no, that's much later, Colin. That's much later.
Okay.
I was working in Zurich in 72, 73. The embargo was when? 74 or 76?
76.
74.
74. So in about 1971, 72, I was working in Zurich, and there was a company in Zug, which is where Philip Brothers was, basically not doing oil. Philip Brothers was an old-fashioned, as you've described in your book, sort of commodities company. And all of a sudden, and I remember this also early in the morning, a company called Arinam, and I believe it's Arinam. All of a sudden, this company that nobody had ever heard of came up with it could have been Ecuadorian or some South American, definitely, let's say, from a Latin American or source. And that Arinam turned out to be the oil trading the oil division of Philip Brothers in Zug. And that's where Mark Rich was. But they were not very big. They really came after the embargo.
Yeah.
And
Joyce, similarly, John Joyce was later as well.
Yeah, John Joyce, I can't tell you the year. John Joyce, as you mentioned also in your book, he really has to be credited before Mark Rich with really coming up with very, very creative deals. He did the very famous Cuba-Russia exchange, where he took Mexican oil. He went to the Russians and said, "Why are you sending oil to Cuba? I can get it from Mexico." He did the exchange, saved all of the freight, and then took this oil. But he was always very much on the edge. South Africa, and other places that were, let's just call it dicey. I don't know what the rules and regulations was. I think John Joyce, I doubt if that's 71, 72. Again, historically, one can look these things up. I think he was more 73, 74. There was this period between 70 and 74 where these events happened.
Since we are in that period, Tom, or Nancy, you probably might know as well, that was that period of interesting regulation in the United States that sort of spun a merry-go-round of moving oil, new oil, old oil, with a differential pricing between two.
That's much later.
Oh, okay.
That again, sorry, Nancy, but I think the old oil, new oil, the one that got.
You mean the Texas oil?
Yeah.
WTI.
No,
Yeah,
there
you
was this.
talking about
That's the
US.
thing that got Mark Rich into trouble.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was doing that with Atlantic Ridge.
Yeah, that was like, I believe you're going about 5 years ahead.
Well,
Yeah,
that was
78.
no.
Yeah.
You're right to say that, Adi, because that
78,
yeah,
79.
that was about 78, 79, exactly.
Yeah.
That was
Do you
really
remember any
that
of
was
that, or were you involved? Because it was a bizarre period. I mean, there was a huge number of trading companies set up just for, doing the
Yep.
merry-go-round.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was Coke Oil involved in some of that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think Coke Oil was
again,
involved in some of that.
this is now 78 to 80, the coastal states.
Coastal states,
But,
Coke maybe.
It's late, I would say late 70s. You had
70, 70, 78, 79.
What was the name of the company that Mike Leonard's friend was? The guy was Meltzer, and anyway,
That was they started at Coastal States, I believe.
yeah,
Coastal States was very involved in that.
yeah.
That was Well, and Mark Rich took the brunt of that. Mark Rich took the United States brunt for all of that. Yeah.
In the book, we talk a little bit about how Mark Rich leaving Fibro galvanized Fibro itself into action, finding that they had a competitor. And one of the folks who was involved with Fibro there in the early days, a gentleman by the name of Patrick de Barros, he's written a book, albeit in Portuguese. But in that book, my kind of poor Spanish was sufficient enough to understand that he mentioned some folks in Fibro. He called them the sort of the A team: Tom O'Malley, David Toby, Vin Bomeo, and Marcus Green. These were people you must be familiar
Al
with.
Kaplan.
Big
Al Kaplan.
Big Al.
Who was very torn between doing crude oil deals and talking to his bookie. Back to your comment, Colin, about horses always being involved. He would run down to 6th Avenue to chat with his bookie while he was trying to close the deal. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
According to rumor.
According to Tom Malley. According to Tom Malley, he said we all have an albatross.
Yeah.
He once said.
No, he said that to me.
He said that to that. Yeah, but we were.
That was another story.
And Al Kaplan's by albatross. We all have an albatross.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Tom O'Malley's continued on in the business, hasn't he?
Well, he's an example of when he formed. What was the company he formed after he left Fibro?
Well, he took over Tosco, and he started buying.
That was huge.
Arcadia.
No, it was Marcus Green. That was Marcus Green. Who was Toby's best friend in life. Yes. Yeah.
Who? We recently saw David.
Go with us, Nancy.
Marcus Green and David Toby were terrific friends, terrific colleagues. They all were. It was a very small, very tight group, and and at Sun we did a lot of business with all of them. Toby and I was assigned to Toby, and he was assigned to me, and we just Fibro gave him me, and Sun gave me him. Literally, it worked like that, and we had many good years together. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So this is all before the days of BBQs and Brent 40s and 15-day Brent and all of that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Well, Thomas is speaking more before that, but my time was quickly becoming. When I was at Sun, we were quickly becoming the BNF and the BBQs. Yeah, that happened pretty quickly. Was that 79 in your book? I forget what the.
No, it's into the early 80s, really.
Into the early 80s, yes.
Yeah, and a bunch of folks got together in Chez Girard, folks that you know very well. I'm sure the Jerry Brennan and Claire and David Houghton, etc. And they're credited with sort of inventing, if you like.
Yes, fair enough.
This whole thing, and it morphed into 15-day Brent, and that 15-day Brent really was the thing that, alongside on the futures markets, WTI got the market going, and I guess caused a whole bunch of different companies to get interested. Futures refiners, traders, goodness knows who. So you then, Nancy, you did your time at Sun, and then Bob Fiduniak came along, and the next thing was Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
And you would have been in the early days competing strongly with Goldman Sachs, J. Aaron, or were you different
Yeah.
types of entities? Or
Well, we were different types of. Yeah. I mean, it was also new. Yeah, we were competing, but I think our heads were more into just trying to decide how we were going to go forward and what was going to become of all this. You know, it was very early days, very scary early days. You know, we were busy building the team. I think Jay Aaron were doing the same thing parallel, not far down the street in New York. And you know, everybody was busy setting up their floor division, you know, who was going to handle their floor business, et cetera. And yeah, I think while we were aware of them, you know, they started after we did. And then I believe you'll know more about this than I remember, but I think it was then Drexel Burnham were the next.
But you did the first contract.
But we did we were the Morgan Stanley
You
was
have
the
to
first.
emphasize.
No, but Morgan Stanley for sure was the first.
You want to tell the story of Shell when you offered?
Yeah, well,
It's a nice story.
it's yeah, but and basically I think it was Morgan Stanley, Jay Aaron, Drexel. I can't remember when Merle started, but while there was competition, I think it was more about just, you know, trying to build your business, you know, trying to talk to the people in the London markets, you know, making sure that you had the East Coast lock, you know, just building where you're going.
yeah, and I guess it was a little different for you guys and Aaron, because it seems to me that you know, with you and John Shapiro, you had a physical oil background, very strong physical background, whereas, you know, Goldman or GM, whatever they were called at the time, were much more kind of a metals and a, you know, commodities sort of paper financial markets background. There must have been differences in the way you approach the market, I would have thought.
Well, that's an excellent point, Colin, because I remember vividly during the interview process, all the meetings with Bob Fiduniak. I probably met with Morgan Stanley 6 or 7 times before they offered me a position and before I decided to accept it. But I remember very clearly saying, this is a very frightening, from my perspective, this is quite an undertaking because I know nothing about how you trade commodities. And and from what I can just see from the outside, you people are very used to moving one paper document, you know, from one place to another. And this is a highly physical business that you're talking about getting into. And you have to understand that. I mean, I really drove that home.
It's not a question.
Yeah, and I said it's not a question of if a problem happens. It's just when, you know, a ship will blow into a dock, something will happen. And I said I am really fortunate to have an excellent background from Sun, worked with very good international lawyers, you know, learned what that was all about, and you know, I can find the solution to the problem. But that kind of problem solving will not be coming from inside Morgan Stanley. You know, that you're going to have to trust us to go outside Morgan Stanley, but from inside Morgan Stanley, whoever you hire to start this division, you're going to have to put a commodity, 1 or 2 commodities traders on that desk. You know, this is, I saw it as a marriage, a merging of the commodity trading philosophies that Morgan Stanley were pros in. And, you know, what I could bring to the whole story was experience in the physical oil trading.
And you were more diverse, weren't you, than Goldman, because, you know, there was you, Annie Summers, Michelle Markey. There was a strong female element to Morgan Stanley that there wasn't in Goldman, right?
I can't. I'm trying to remember. I think I asked Anne to join us. I think in '85. I can't really remember when that happened, but yes, and Anne came with yes, lots of international as well as domestic experience. She had been trade acts.
Yeah.
In a lot of yes. But it was interesting times because Duniak really understood. He was a really interesting fellow, and he really, really understood what his task was. And his task was to really create an international trading division based on the international physical world merging with his commodities. And he really knew, he understood that fully. They were frightened of it, and when we did have our first problem, they did not handle it well. Internally, we solved the problem, but it wasn't easy because it terrified them.
That period of time, there was this rush. It was almost a gold rush by banks to get into the business. Why was that?
Colin can probably answer that better than I can. I would just guess they wanted to be part of the game. They just saw it. They thought it was easy. They just said, okay, if he's doing it, I can do it. And it just seemed like another opportunity. But
and the game was a bit probably liberalization as well, with Reagan coming in, and then there was also what 83 was the NYMEX started, WTO.
Well,
so
that's very important, Adi. Yes, I should have said that. Yes, back to my Sundays. That was another plus coming from Sun. Sun were very connected to the exchanges, and that was basically because they did so much domestic New York Harbor gasoline, jet fuel, heating oil sort of business. So they were very, very tied to, they met often with the guys at NYMEX. They met often with, the brokers who handled the New York Harbor, et cetera, et cetera. And so we knew what contracts were considered for we knew that crude oil was coming on when it was, or WTI was coming on when it was coming on, et cetera. And yes, and that Sun knew, for example, that they couldn't continue doing what they were doing without being part of that world. And they happily engaged in it. They happily became a big part of it.
Yeah.
but then
So you then had a second career, Nancy, didn't you? I mean, Thomas, you were all set, I think, if I'm not mistaken, to retire from the oil business and do more with your old master's drawings and art expertise. And Nancy was retiring from Morgan Stanley, going to join you. And then, as I understand it, you received a telephone call while you were at Gatwick Airport. Is that correct?
It's crazy. Yeah, you couldn't make it up. You really couldn't make this up. Yes. I had been I've been on the phone a few days before we were leaving London for the States with Doris Bowser at Rhine Oil. And she just in a very blasé way said, "Don't get on the plane without checking in with me. I want to talk to you about something." And I forgot about it. So she just said it in such a blasé. So we were at the airport, and I get this message that
we had already checked in the
bags. Yeah,
as for accuracy's sake.
Yes.
So the bags were already checked in, and we're someplace.
We went to have a drink.
We went to have a drink. We were going to California for 2 weeks to visit Nancy's family. And there was this on the public address
that I should go to such and such information desk because I had a phone call.
That phone call.
So the phone call was to call Rhine Oil. So I called Rhine Oil, and Doris and Helmar were shouting at me that I couldn't get on the plane. I said, the bags are checked. She said, you can't get on the plane. You have to come to Germany.
You have to call them.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah. Well, first she said you have to come to Germany. I said, why do I have to come? I thought it was a joke. I said, you have to come to Germany. And she said, write this number down. So I'm saying to Thomas, do you have a pen? We're having a Bloody Mary, basically. And so I'm writing this phone number down. And she said, that's the number for Alfred Herrhausen, the chairman of the board of Deutsche Bank. And I said, and he wants to hear from me. I was laughing.
No, but you thought it was a prank, like a.
I thought it was a prank. So I said
a graduation prank.
No, yeah, exactly. And I said, Doris, when we were kids, we would give somebody a number and say, call Mr. Lyon, and he would give the number of the zoo. So I thought, she was really having one on me. And so she said, no.
We should have known better that the Germans don't have that sense.
The Doris would
Yeah, I'm sorry. We should have known better, but
definitely the Doris would not have done this. But she was, such a pro and so I knew if Doris is shouting at me, I better listen. So I said to Thomas, well, I guess you better get the bags off the plane. And he said, how am I going to do that? I said, I don't know. So he walks away and says, whatever it is, we got the bags off the plane.
My aunt died,
Something like that.
Okay.
And and I couldn't get it. We couldn't get a direct flight from Gatwick. We went back to the apartment in London. And then the next morning we flew to Dusseldorf, I think. And that, I don't think I returned home for a year and a half, something like that. It was insane.
Yeah.
You tell us more.
That was the Klöckner.
That was Klöckner.
Can you tell us just a little bit more what the problem was with
Well, the problem was something that, in a weird sense, I was probably the right person to call about that, because the source of this problem was Klöckner had been doing a lot of business with Gatoil, basically fronting for Gatoil.
By the way, Klöckner was just for listeners who don't know, a huge German conglomerate and a steel, right?
Steel trading organization.
It was the largest steel trading company in the world at that time.
Yeah.
And an enormous conglomerate, yeah.
Jörg and Peter Henley, where Jörg Henley was the chairman, and I guess Peter Henley, the brother, was the president. And a number of Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was their what's the German Vorstein?
Hausbank. The Germans.
Hausbank.
It's called the Hausbank, and they usually own a piece of the corporation of Bayer and Mercedes.
So that's the reason why Deutsche Bank was involved in all this. And in any event, I knew when I was at Morgan Stanley that Klöckner, I knew Wolfgang Schesmar very well. And I had told Wolfgang over many years, I'm sorry, we're not doing business with you because we're doing much too much business with Gatoil, and the daisy chains are very fragile.
You had experience with Gatoil.
And at Morgan Stanley, we had an experience, which was Morgan Stanley's first frightening experience, which we managed to solve. But that was another real, very, very difficult time for everybody. It was a real cliffhanger. Until the ship involved sailed. So anyway, I knew to stay away from Klöckner, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I forget how many cargoes they had, but they had a lot of cargoes with Gatoil, and Gatoil just non-performed. Gatoil just said, it's your problem. The price is too high. The price is dropping. I'm not taking this.
This is 15-day Brent contract.
This is 15-day Brent contracts. Yeah. 15-day Brent contract.
And there was physical involved as well.
There was because of other, they had,
Algerian.
They had Algerian products. Yeah, we had other problems, but basically the heart of the problem itself was 15-day Brent. Yes.
And the total amount was what, roughly?
Well, I think it was, my memory says we had the equivalent of something like 102 ships on the water, the equivalent of without a home.
Wow.
It's like it's unforgettable. But anyway, so we arrived in Duisburg, which is where Klöckner is, and went from there.
Yeah.
We spent some time with Alfred Herrhausen, excuse me, who was a wonderful man, an amazing guy, actually. And he just said, we cannot fail. Basically, is what he told me. We cannot fail. I said, okay, that's not too much pressure. We'll see how we can handle all this. But
he was later assassinated by the Deutsche.
Collins was the one who told me.
Yeah, by the Rote Armee faction.
The Red Army faction. Yeah.
Now, Nancy, how was it actually? Just because a lot of listeners wouldn't know the thing, how was it resolved, and what was the fallback, and did it have an impact on the Brent market? Just briefly.
It's such a big question, but in short, such a big question, because in short, first of all, we had to hire a team. We had to bring in new people. I actually hired Thomas because he speaks French, and we had all these products in Algeria, all these contracts nobody knew what to do with. and all sorts of other things that he knew about from his time in Europe. And so basically, once we had
You hired 5 people.
we hired 5 people. We full-time hired Richard Black, who was a lawyer, a maritime lawyer from London, who I knew we were going to use because we were going to need, because I knew that we were going through arbitration for sure in the courts of the UK. Excuse me. And so basically, we just took day by day, and I decided that the best way would be to shield the Klöckner, to shield the market from the weight of the Klöckner overhang, which was enormous. And we needed somebody to front for us. Front being, let me sell a few cargoes to Mobil, was one company that agreed to do this with us, Morgan Stanley, but hesitantly, excuse me, because Morgan Stanley had credit issues. Sorry. But anyway, we set ourselves up with front people, which gave us time, thanks, to move some oil off the books and ease the burden. And so we continued to do that. Doris, Rhine Oil, we continued to do that for some months before people really realized. So everything calmed down. The hysteria calmed down. The point was, take the pressure off, let everybody think that we're in charge, everything will be okay. We're not going to dump all this oil on the market. That was the point. If we dumped all this oil on the market, the price would, we all knew that. And nobody in the business wanted that, but everybody was also afraid to do business with us. So it wasn't easy. We had to do it. And people wanted credit confirmations from Deutsche Bank, which they weren't going to give at all, which we did it all with, a little bit of magic, a little bit of mirrors. But
you pulled in a lot of favors, Nancy, right? It's basically
what. Oh, a lot of favors, and a lot of favors. Interesting comment, Colin. A lot of favors, but also there were people who just knew they should help, which was a very good thing to see.
Can I make a gossip?
Yeah.
This would not happen recently. So Alfred Herrhausen was interviewed by the FAZ, the Frankfurter Allgemein, which is the most important newspaper in Germany. He was on his way to Russia and he was working with Gorbachev to give them credit lines and everything like that under instructions of Helmut Kohl, the president. And he gives an interview and he absolutely discloses how many cargoes, what the open position was.
After, by the way, I told everybody.
To the Frankfurter Allgemein, and it shows you how provincial. You would think that if I'm in a business and a company in Madrid is going bankrupt, I'm going to buy some Spanish newspapers and see what the local people said. Nobody picked that up.
Not even Fibro. I totally expected
nobody
Fibro.
Picked it up. Nobody read about it. Nobody looked at it. It wasn't picked up by the Financial Times. And this was the Frankfurter Allgemein.
So the next morning.
I mean, very interesting. Those things were not happening anymore.
The morning of that debacle, I received a phone call from a wonderful man called Christoph von Rohr, who was in Helmut Kohl's cabinet, a terrific, wonderful man, who I was really assigned to. He was a Klöckner executive, and we worked side by side. He was a terrific man. Is a terrific man. And he said, "You're not going to believe this, but this has been disclosed." And I said, "Well, we may as well all go home," or something like that.
It was all published.
It was all published. And I said, "But I have to stop this immediately. How can I talk to Mr. Herrhausen?" He said, "I'll have him call you." And he said, "Try not to tell him he made a mistake." I said, "Okay, I'll try not to tell him he made a mistake." So I said, "Mr. Herrhausen, this is a really bad thing. We can't do this again. And fingers crossed, I'll try to come up with a roundabout excuse as to how this information isn't fully correct, and I'll find a way to make it easier to digest, and I can explain it away. Hopefully this will be the path we'll be able to take." And then it just disappeared.
Disappeared.
Wow. Well, anyway, This is in a nutshell the Klöckner affair. And this was, when was this exactly, when you were retiring?
1989, 1988, 89.
87,
And the
No,
Brent
88.
market,
88. It was 1988.
and the
88.
problem for a lot of listeners is that it was the Brent market survived a
The
pretty
Brent
big,
market survived, and the Brent market did not suffer. The
yeah.
Brent market had a few days of market volatility, but I think if we looked, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I think if we look back over the price of oil, you'll see that it remained very, very steady, and it did not know. And we literally had, I think it was the equivalent of 102,
120%.
102, I think. But anyway, and it did not. We arrested Mr. Gattes. The Germans sent a military helicopter. That was quite an experience. And and the company was saved. The company is a thriving company today. No one lost their jobs.
And the bank probably made a lot of money because they took over from the owners, obviously.
Yes.
And then they went public. It's a private company, and now they're still on the stock exchange.
Yes, they went public.
At the Frankfurter Stock Exchange.
By the way, Nancy, your camera went off for some reason. But
it did? I don't know why.
Well, anyway, we're way over time, but it doesn't mean.
Okay.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, well done. Colin, I don't know if you have anything else before we go. We'll probably have to wrap up, and there's so much more to talk, and I have no doubt that we will have to talk again about some more detail.
I think so.
I want to hear more about you and Jay Serena.
Yeah, don't forget, you only heard Nancy 1, 2. There's a Nancy 3. You heard Nancy 1 in the oil business, 2 at Klöckner, and then there was another catastrophe.
They said.
A few years later.
Which was
one last question, Nancy, and I think I know the answer is probably going to be no comment, but I know that you wrote a book about your experiences with this and with a successive situation that you also resolved for Metallgesellschaft.
Yeah.
But you chose at the end of the day not to publish it. Why was that?
Yeah. Well, I chose because exactly at the point when it was about to be published, the Metallgesellschaft situation happened, and it would have become a very difficult book to have on the market at that time for legal reasons. So it was just
not worth the
it was, the timing was just terrible. So I just pulled it, and there were a lot of it was complicated, but that's basically is the reason. Yeah, and it was a fun book to write. I mean, I have to say, I enjoyed the whole process, and I don't know if it would hold up today. I'm thinking about that, whether or not it would be.
Maybe think about it. I'm sure it
would be better as a novel, I think.
Yeah. Well, it could be a chapter in one of your books on specific stories.
It's a case study.
Stories, tales from the oil, the oil trade. Yeah. Just in these kind of stories and more in depth.
Anyway, I am thinking about it, Colin. You've brought it a few times, and I appreciate the comment. Yeah. But I'll let you. Yeah.
I think it would be a marvelous addition to the the range of books, and people will be fascinated to hear and see. Anyway, listen. Thank you very much, both of you.
Cheers.
It's really kind of you. I'm very jealous of you sitting in probably.
No, we're in Florence. We're in Firenze. We're in Firenze now.
We're in Florence. We're in Florence.
Such is life. Such is life.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. We'll talk to you again for sure.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Take it easy.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.